I guess what would you say separates a good listing broker from a bad listing broker? We see a lot of properties on the market. We're tracking everything that hits every single day, but what would you say separates the two? And I feel like it's pretty clear.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. One being find a broker that's going to be proactive for you, one that's going to put in the work, not wait for inbound calls, not wait for leads to come their way, but we'll get out there, try and find the buyer, find the tenant, and really make sure you're getting the best deal.
Yeah.
And that's something that I know we really pride ourselves on.
Yeah.
Is being proactive. So what are some of the other things you're seeing out there?
I think it's really back to the basics of doing your homework, looking at the comps, talking to lenders. What is this realistically going to trade at? Yeah, you can add a little bit of a buffer for negotiation, of course, but doing your research and going that extra mile on showing your value and earning your fee. You made a really good point about putting in the work, doing the outbound calls. I think what we saw a lot of during COVID that created a lot of bad habits for a lot of brokers was they were just getting bombarded with inbound leads and they didn't really have to do anything. They just put it on the market. Now it's very different where you've got to be a very active broker. You've got to do those outbound calls. You need to canvas. You need to really work your listings and earn your fee to actually get a deal done and be knowledgeable about it. I think that's a really huge differentiator between a good and a bad listing broker.
I agree. Another thing we see a lot is people going outside of their area of expertise. I know some brokers out there are generalists, which is totally fine.
Yep.
We try and stay in our lane, but we do see a lot of times, especially industrial buildings, get listed with residential agents.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's a family friend or someone that they have a personal relationship with. But at the end of the day, it's doing you a disservice, and it's also doing that agent a disservice if they're listing a building that they're not as familiar with and not experienced with that asset type.
I agree. I mean, we put in so much work, and even our competitors with the database, knowing the market, looking at the comps. I mean, if you're not doing this day in and day out, you really don't know the nuances with each property, each submarket, and each deal. So I agree. You're definitely doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah, that and working with a broker that has those relationships in the field too. Yeah. Who's going to be the broker that knows the neighboring building owners, knows the tenants in the area, what type of companies want to be there, and what they're looking for too.
Yeah, that's huge. I would say another thing too that we didn't touch on is having those hard conversations up front. That's really huge, especially right now where we're in a very interesting market. Going back to you really have to work these listings, but bringing up all the bad news up front with your seller is going to save you so much time on the back end. So,
what kind of bad news are you talking about?
Bad news with like what we were talking about a little bit earlier on, maybe leases that are under market, maybe the property's not managed to the best of its abilities, going over maybe some disadvantages, some deferred maintenance that might hinder you on the market. Essentially, you're telling your seller, this is how a buyer is going to look at it. And this is what they're potentially going to negotiate as well. So providing that ammunition up front, I think is imperative to, prepping them for what's going to happen on the market.
Yeah,
preparing for the worst.
That's a big thing with the deferred maintenance. A lot of sellers don't think that it's going to come up, or they underestimate the expense it's going to take to complete that maintenance. But at the end of the day, the buyer's looking at it like, what am I going to have to do day one when I take over this property? Am I going to have to put a new roof on for $30,000?
Yep.
And that's something that they might end up negotiating off the price.
Yeah.
So just something to keep in mind. It doesn't necessarily make sense to do all of that work prior to listing, but as long as the seller is aware of what they're selling.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Awesome.